As a child, I was prone to waking up in the middle of the night. About once a week, my eyes would burst open as if something had awoken me, but there was never anything there. There were the echoes of a noise that I just couldn't recall, a silence that reminded me of something deafening, but no one else seemed to feel it. At first, I would simply try to return to sleep, but always found myself unable to. At some point, I would roll out of bed, pitter-patter down the hallway and try to wake up my brother so I wouldn't be alone in the night. No matter how much I yelled or shook, he would never wake up. Inevitably, I would find myself crawling into his bed and simply waiting what felt like hours until I would also return to sleep, comforted by his presence. I was just a little kid who looked up to his older brother, and I believed that he could protect me from anything, even in his sleep. As an adult, the problem persists. However, there is no one here to comfort me. I live on my own now, no family in the area, and no girlfriend in my life, but I still find myself waking up at least once a week. It is no longer to a silent sound that I can't recall, but rather to the sounds of a screaming baby just one house over. I don't mind it so much. I know it must be more of a hassle for the parents than for myself, but it can be tiresome. Instead of tossing and turning in bed, I brew myself some hot cocoa and add in just the smallest spike of Crown Royal whiskey. I'll then make my way to my computer chair, where I can enjoy an hour or two of some warm conversation on 4chan before the fuzzy feelings of sleep invited me back to bed. When I first awoke last night, I had no reason to think this was anything other than business as usual. If the baby had been crying, I seemed to have just missed it, but it wasn't something I gave much thought to. It was a bit earlier than usual, about 2 a.m., and I stayed at my computer until almost 6. I knew the sun would be coming up soon, and had already enjoyed 2 mugs of my spiked beverage. If I didn't return to bed then, there wouldn't be another chance until the sun went down. It was my day off, but I could only sleep in until about 9, as I had plans to meet my friend pretty early for a trip to the beach. I crawled into bed, pulled my covers up over me, and let myself be comforted by the waves of warmth. As was typical, I found myself rolling over here and there as I waited to succumb to my tiredness, occasionally opening my eyes to try and peek at the rising sun's light through my window, but it never came. Rolling around quickly became tossing and turning, and peeks at my windows became glances at my phone. By 7 a.m., I knew the sun should be up, but it wasn't until 8 that I knew something must be wrong. I had to wake up in about an hour anyway, so I figured I might as well get an early start and wake myself up with a shower. Before heading into the restroom, I stopped to look out the blinds of my window and was surprised to see that there wasn't even the crack of dawn in the distance. I mused over whether or not I had missed something important, as if I could drunkenly forget daylight savings in the dead of summer. The thought of it made me laugh, but when I returned from my long shower, I was no longer laughing. It was almost 9 a.m. now, but the sun still wasn't up. I flipped open my phone with frustration and began a Google search for my own local time, thinking that my Android's internal clock had simply messed up, but the internet showed the exact same thing I was seeing on my device, give or take a minute. This led me on a hunt across the house, checking every piece of technology I had, from the old watch at the bottom of my drawer, to my computer in my home office, to the time on my TV. Everything showed the exact same consistent time, now well into 9:30. When flipping through the channels on my television, everything seemed to still be playing late night. There was no early morning news, no talk shows, and no traffic or weather reports. Every station was playing classic Looney Tunes, syndicated Black family sitcoms, and the kind of infomercials people only witness when no one else is awake. Next, I took to the internet. I scoured every social media platform I could imagine. Facebook had updates, but they were only the kind that you would see late at night. The 3 a.m. thoughts of people who binged watched something into the morning and needed to simply put their voices out into the world to be acknowledged. I tried to acknowledge them. I tried to reply. I tried to like. I tried to share. But there were no reactions to my reaction. Then came the cell phones. It started with text, but I gave up fast on that. I began to call every single number I had, even hotlines and businesses, but no one ever answered. I left messages everywhere, begging them to talk to me, begging them to tell me what was going on. But no matter what I threw into the void, nothing ever returned. I even placed a call to my local police station, first the non-emergency line, but then I called 911 when I only found an answering machine, though in the end, I got the same message. After hours of harassing people online and on my phone, it was now well past noon. I had been checking the windows to see if anyone else woke up, but if they did, they never left their houses. I didn't blame them. I was scared too, but how else could I discover what was happening to everyone else? And so, I donned my shoes, put on a shirt, and made my way to the front door. There is something unsettling about trying to leave your house late at night, before midnight. It feels like there is nothing to worry about, but after then, it becomes increasingly uncomfortable. Despite the darkness, however, this wasn't night. It was now afternoon, though that only made it more intimidating to step out into the black. I considered bringing some sort of weapon, but going and knocking on neighbors' doors with a weapon in hand in the middle of the night probably wouldn't get me invited in. And so, I went into the streets and began knocking on doors. I began 2 doors down, where I was on relatively good terms with the man who lived there. We were the only 2 on the block who lived without families, just 2 single men in their smaller homes with spare rooms. There was an unspoken understanding between us that we reached out to each other first when in need of some help. Most of the families surrounding us had children, after all, and were less likely to have the time or resources to help. His name was Kenneth, and he had knocked on my door late one night when he needed a ride to the emergency room some months ago. He had hurt his hand pretty bad and didn't think he'd be able to handle a steering wheel. As such, I knew he would owe me an understanding reaction to me knocking on his door late at night. Except, he didn't answer the door. I tried knocking on his window and garage before giving up, but there was no response there either. I moved on to the next house between ours and immediately rang the doorbell. No answer. I walked up and down the block knocking, but there was never an answer. I gave up trying to be quiet, trying to only alert the person in the house, but I never heard a noise in return. Even the house next to mine returned nothing but silence when I began beating my fist against the door. I couldn't believe it. This family had an infant son who cried at all hours of the day, even in the dead of night. He seemed triggered by the slightest noises, and they had even asked me to turn down my television one night so as not to disturb him. Yet, he had no reaction tonight. I returned to Kenneth's house, this time ready to let myself in. Without a family to worry about, he was less likely to be on edge, assuming he was even inside, though I truly doubted it. I had a feeling that I was the only one left on our street, that everyone else had left or been evacuated, and I needed to prove it. His front door was locked, but he was definitely the kind of man to leave his back door open. I let myself in, not bothering to sneak around or tiptoe. I wanted to alert him of my presence if it turned out he was home. I made my way to the end of the house, fully expecting to find an empty bed in an empty room, but it wasn't empty. There he was, Kenneth, close to how I saw him, just sleeping in bed. His hair was a tad bit messier than usual, and it appeared he was naked if the discarded boxer shorts on the floor were any indication. But he was there, so I said his name. Then I yelled it. I went from soft to shouting in a matter of seconds, unable to understand why I didn't wake him up before with all my yelling and knocking. Even at this close proximity, he remained asleep, however. What if he isn't asleep? A chill ran through me as a thought entered my mind. I rushed to the side of his bed, not taking the time to rationalize the possibilities of what could have happened to him. I shook him. I screamed. I tried hitting him, but nothing woke him up. His heart beat faster and his breath became heavier, but nothing woke him up. Even opening his eyes had no effect. I practically threw him across the room in my attempt to break him out of his slumber, but he fell without any resistance. No change. He was a living corpse, unable to react to anything. But was he the only one? I made my way out of his house, grabbing a spare object on my way, a frying pan that Kenneth had left on the counter. I crossed his yard directly into our neighbors, to the family with the screaming baby that had now become silent, and began to smash at their sliding glass door. I tried to be cautious stepping in, but I couldn't bring myself to care too much. When I sliced some of my skin open on the glass, I just needed to get in. I needed to see the parents, the children, the dog, to see if any one of them would wake up, but none of them would. The parents shared their bed. Their daughters were tucked in, and just like Kenneth, they seemed unable to wake up. I made my way to a room at the end of the hall, one I knew must house their youngest son since he was the only one I hadn't seen yet. I shook and I shook and I shook, but the little boy wouldn't wake up. I wanted to take the frying pan and bash him with it, to dare him to move, to dare him to end this insane prank that the whole town seemed to be playing on me, to cry like he would every other night, but I stopped myself. Instead, I was the one who cried. It wasn't manly, it wasn't smart, but it was what I did. I just sat there in this little boy's room and cried, not knowing what else to do. Even calling the police had just led to an answering machine. What else was there? I was all alone in the dark of night, except I wasn't. I heard a noise and froze. There was something else in the house. Then I heard the noise again. No, it wasn't in the house. It was in the room, and I recognized that sound. It was a sound I could never describe, the one that I could never remember. Yet somehow, it was also a noise I could never forget. It was the sound that woke me up each night, the sound that fades away as I return to consciousness, thinking I only imagined it in the silence. And it was in the room with me. I turned slowly to see the thing that made the sound behind me. It didn't look like a person, and yet, it wasn't a monster either. It was impossibly tall, with arms longer than its legs. It had to hunch to stop its head from pushing straight through the ceiling, and it smiled from ear to ear. No, that wasn't a smile. It didn't have cheeks or skin on its face. It just had teeth. Teeth that stretched from one ear to another to make it look like it was smiling. But it wasn't. It reached across the room from the little boy's closet, its fingers finding my face from almost a foot away from its palms, and it began to search it. It touched every muscle, every tendon, every pore, every cell in my skin as it explored my features as if it was blind. But it was staring right at me with those bright lights in its dark eyes. This was the thing that woke me up at night, the thing that woke up this little boy at night, that made him cry out in the darkness because of what he heard or perhaps even seen. I could feel it in his touch, his loneliness. It followed me, shrieking its strange shriek in the silence that somehow only I could hear, daring me to wake up, daring me to notice him. And I finally did. Today, it finally got me to look him in the eyes and share in the horror of the deafening shrieks it made with its teeth slammed together. Just then, the little boy woke up. He was barely more than a toddler and he began screaming, crying just like he did every other night. The creature in the closet turned away from me, its fingers no longer caring to explore my face, and instead, it focused on that poor little boy. I wanted to get in the way. I wanted to yell or scream or hit this monster with the frying pan, but I just ran. I ran from the room. from the house, from the street, and ran until I couldn't anymore. The baby stopped crying before I was out of earshot. I don't want to know what caused him to stop. I just hoped he was like everyone else, that he just went back to sleep. But I don't think that's how this works. It's now been over 24 hours. The sun was supposed to rise again, but I know it won't. In every house on every street I broke into, I found someone sleeping, but I didn't try to wake them. I didn't have to. I just knew that I had to keep checking to see if this was something that ended or something that just kept going forever. My tiredness comes and goes now. Sometimes I feel like I'm on the brink of passing out, and I welcome it. Then, I hear that thing shrieking in the distance, and I am brought back to a lucid state. No matter how far away I get, I can still hear it, and it's getting closer. As I write this, I am on the edge of town. I found an unlocked door and let myself in, needing to refreshen myself with a shower and some food. I doubt the owner will ever wake up, but in case he does, I'm writing this note for him and leaving it on his desktop. I wish I could write more, but I know that the creature is coming for me. I was quiet enough sneaking in here, but no matter how far I go or how quiet I am, it does seem to find a way to catch up with me. I have decided to steal this man's keys and take his car. I'm not proud of this action, but it seems to be the only way I'll be able to get to the next town over without crossing paths with that monstrosity again. I've decided to head north to my brother's town. I don't think he will be awake, but that's never been the case when I have sought his comfort in the night. Instead, I just hope to find him asleep. Perhaps if I spend the night in his bed, I'll fall asleep as well, as we did back when we were kids. At least, I hope so. If this message does manage to be found, I hope this story can help. On those nights where you're awake before the sun comes up, when you know something had to have woken you, but you find yourself surrounded only by silence, know that you aren't crazy, and whatever you do, go back to sleep if you can.